Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where it's about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about episode 6 of Brand New Cherry Flavor. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Thought it was really interesting, the opening to this episode, kind of giving us a tiny little more insight into the whole Mary and Lisa situation, because we only got like a little snippet of it. At least we got Mary's perspective of it. And at first, on some level, I was kind of wondering. I was like, well, the way the conversation was going, it did seem like Mary was kind of a down for a lot of those choices. I was like, maybe that was her just being an actress. But then I'm like, no, she said it herself that Lisa kept pushing and pushing until the point like she couldn't tell the difference between herself and the character. So it's like, yeah, like at that point, like Lisa had already pushed her so much and be like, it's okay, you got this. We'll keep going all night until it takes, because she's like, I want to get this. It's like, I should use a real knife. And others are like, no. But Lisa's like, no, let her. And even when the point that she like cuts herself, it's like, whoa, cut. It wasn't even Lisa that held, it was like some, like the cameraman. And she's like, what, you don't tell me to cut? Only she gets to tell me to cut. So it just shows you what kind of like, enthrallment that, enchantment of sorts that Lisa kind of spell she had on Lisa. And it seemed like there was a relationship, but it was more so like you can tell even just from the way they were making out and stuff like that, her hand is so bloody and like touching Lisa's face and just being like, are you ready for this last scene? She's like, I don't know if I can't do it if you're not here. It's like, okay, it'll just be us. So now we kind of get to, obviously we know the next part of this is where we eventually get to the final scene where she ended up eating her own eye. So it's like, now, because I also think about too, like in retrospect, it's like, right, we did see that Lisa had blood on her face when Mary was explaining what happened. Now we get, like I said, that's the next scene after this. So we got the build up to that point. Because also what helped or led to that situation is that Mary and Lisa were on peyote. I don't know what I was about to say, but peyote, which I'm like, that was kind of her decision, but once again, it's like, well, being high, it's like, right, at least Mary is like, I'm showing you the real me, I want to see the real you, and she's like, on peyote, and it's like, ended up unlocking something. Hell, even that's how Lisa described it. She's like, she even says later on, she doesn't remember everything that went down. She's like, I waited 2 days, but I took my movie and I came to LA. Well, she just took her movie afterwards, but, and she just kind of left and bailed after waiting for Mary for 2 days. I'm like, I feel like he could have done a lot more. Could have actually called to make sure she was okay. It just seems like, shows that she didn't mean that much to you because you weren't that concerned. You're like, I waited 2 whole days. I took my movie and bounced. So I think that speaks volumes. But she doesn't remember it, but she brings up the fact is that it did unlock something inside of her, so she never knew what's there. So I thought that was interesting. Obviously, there's a whole milk bath situation with that was interesting. I guess it kind of reminds me a little bit of like the milk baths from God, what's its face? Wanted, the movie. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't even think about that until just now because I was like something else to use milk bath. Well, there's also like that Scarlett O'Hara song by the band Scarlett O'Hara. Was it Lost in Existence? Part of that's kind of filmed almost like in a milk bath to a certain extent. I think it's supposed to be like the soul, but it looks kind of like a milk bath. So that's just some of the stuff that comes to my mind immediately when I look at that. But it is interesting too, like obviously Lou finding out from James that, oh, wait, you just left their body there. Wait, Jonathan was there. What's going on here? It's like, I was expecting you to be more professional with it. It's like, well, you never gave him the direct orders of disposing of the body. It's like, once again, these aren't professionals you're hiring. You're hiring pretty cheap labor to commit a murder for you. I don't know why you expected the best of the best. He said making it clean. I don't remember him saying that. But either way, Mary's not too shook up about it. It's like, right, this nightmare for me isn't going to be over until I make sure that she's dead. Because I'm fine with it. You're going to kill her. I'm not going to call the cops. I need her dead because that's the only release I'm going to get. But when they get there, obviously, Lisa's body's nowhere to be found. So he knows the one place to most likely find her. And he goes to Burroughs. And Burroughs is like, yeah, it's kind of like, sends them away, especially when Lou starts sneezing so hard that he like blood shoots out onto his shirt. But interestingly enough, we end up getting a little more insight from Boro. We actually learn Boro's backstory, who is like, Boro was like, this is like 900 years ago, back when I was a man. that basically met a jaguar that wasn't just like a regular jaguar. It had like a spirit inside of it. They banged, and basically he had so much fruit of his life was born from that. He came, ruled a kingdom, but with stuff like that, there always comes a sacrifice. So, like a whole large army came to, and like pillaged and enslaved so many of his people. So he went to the jaguar because it gave him the power to know where all of his enemies were. But the price for it would be to his wife, and so he didn't want to give up his wife, so he used a substitute and ended up gaining the power and ended up slaughtering all the enemies after leading them into a trap. But the jaguar found out and was like, oh, she was super pissed and killed my wife. And then bit off my balls and my hands. And just out of sheer will is where Boro got what Boro has, the ability to jump bodies. It's like, yeah, I've been jumping bodies ever since. It's like, what about the jaguar? It's like, well, eventually the Spanish came and killed her. But it's like she's still alive, and it's like, and looking for you, like, but she's alive on the other side, I guess, in a form of the spirit realm, which I was like, I don't think that's what that is. I was about to say, like, could that be the thing that Lisa keeps seeing? But I'm like, no, I think that's something else. Maybe that's tied to her circumstances, whatever the case may be. But because once again, that seems to be the thing that Lou keeps seeing over and over again, potentially. So. But it's like, right, like, I guess jumping bodies is the only way Boro can make sure, like, I live. Because if I ever die and go to the other side, that jaguar is waiting. She's waiting to rip me to pieces. Like, that, even after all these years, that, Which I find that so interesting that Boro was under the circumstances that he was, that he made a deal with somebody and, sacrifices come with it. And now you're kind of in that same business. Maybe it's kind of almost like do unto others what was done to you. Or maybe it's kind of, I guess that's part of the magical process of like, it helps the whole situation of bouncing from body to body. Because there's also the whole thing too, Lisa never found out either. It was like, what happens to the kittens before you make it? Because we see at least 2 of them that were turned into slippers. It's like, well, what do you do with them before you turn them into slippers? Which, speaking of that, we're evened up on the number of kittens because she did double up on one episode. She didn't throw up any kittens this episode. So I was like, that's fascinating. She was like, oh, like, do you want me to throw up one just like as payment or something? But it's like, to our knowledge, she didn't, but she might have off camera. But they make a point to show each time she does. So we're even in the sense that like she's thrown up 6 kittens and it's been 6 episodes. So we'll see how this plays out for the next 2 episodes. But before we obviously even get to that, there's still so much more to break down about this episode. I thought it was interesting that James is ready, like after Lou's like, all right, here's the payment, go take care of Lisa, make sure she's surely dead this time. Mary goes along, but I even love Boro being like, oh, you got a machete in your bag. Like, no, don't use a machete. How about you wait at her house for her, and then, I can't let you break her yet again. I need to kind of fix her, and then, because it's, once again, I didn't understand, like, why she's playing the double sides, but it's like, whatever Lisa's thing is, she needs Lisa to become, like, died like that darkness in her. Whether it's Boro preparing Lisa's body for her hijacking, or whether it's just Boro's taking an interest in Lisa. Because part of me was also thinking, like, on some twisted level, I'm like, you don't think, like, it's supposed to be like it's going to be a reveal where, like, the Jaguar's inside of, like, Lisa, that Lisa's like a reincarnation of her or something. Just like Boro's been jumping body to body, like maybe the Jaguar has too, and has been buried in Lisa the entire time. I don't know. But once again, just that story makes me think like the Jaguar thingy is going to come up again. But, maybe not in the form of Lisa. Maybe. We'll have to wait and see, but the fact that she's been playing the 2 sides the entire time is like, I guess it's like she wants to understand Lisa more, maybe because understanding Lisa's more, like getting an understanding of her darkness, what's her true nature, makes it easier. Like, to be able to become something, you must have to truly understand it. So that's an interesting conversation. One that also comes up is like, what about, well, like, I don't know. That's all I can really think of is why she's playing both sides of it. Like, she wants to put Lisa in very unfavorable positions. Like, she wants to kind of put her in a corner in certain regard because she wants to see, like, how, which is so interesting because I'm about to say very animalistic because it's like, oh, you want to see the animal in her release considering you had your whole dealings with the Jaguar and everything. But we got a conversation about what happens to the people that Boro possesses. It's like they're there, but they eventually fall away until their voices basically can't even be heard anymore. So even in her case, like Jennifer is still in there somewhere, but buried so deep. But I'm like, once you jump bodies, I'm assuming like at that point, what's inside of them has withered away so much that they're no longer there. Or it's usually like you jump bodies, like, and maybe when you jump, you take all the life force with you and they die then because there's nothing left. Like, I'm curious, like, will you find like previous bodies she's been in that were hollowed out in a sense, like maybe they're in a catatonic state and they're just stuck like that? Or is it just a straight up like, nah, in the moment I'm jumping, maybe it's usually because her previous body is on the verge of death, and that's when Boro did say like it is a long, lengthy process before he gets to jump to the next body. So I'm curious like how that works. I think we'll get to see that body hopping by the end of this, but we'll see. But I thought that was fascinating. There's also the conversation about the zombies. It's like, are they actually dead or can it be brought back? It's like, no, they're straight up dead. There is some part of who they are, which I think is fascinating. That kind of works on the same level as Boro. Not to the same extent, because Boro gets to stay Boro despite everything. But these zombies, it's like on some level they call home sometimes. They're like, that's why, despite being in a state that he's in, Jonathan went to find things that were familiar. Like, I don't know if it was Boro that sent him after Lisa or whether it's because he remembered Lisa, so that's why he went there and being around his family. Because, I mean, he did react to Lisa's name, so maybe that was like one of the last things on his mind before he died, or maybe it's simply because of the whole Boro thing, because like, right, you're meant to like keep an eye on Lisa and stuff like that, so hearing Lisa's name, that's why he gave the thumbs up, like, yeah, you know. So I'm referencing last episode in particular, but over the course of this episode, you can definitely tell, like, after that milk bath, like, Lisa severely changed, because, like, her demeanor and just being like, oh, I'm so refreshed. Even when she's getting in a car with Code, she's like, don't bring me down. Like, she's on, like, some high. She's like, yeah, it felt like I was out of a bath. But Code, it's like, oh, yeah, like, yeah, dude almost beat me to death. It's like, that's not funny. It's like, no, it's not a joke. Dude literally came. It's like, wait, with, like, try to shoot you? It's like, no, almost beat me to death. You know, and Christine was handling a lot of that. Like, it's like, no, if you want to, you can stay with it, which is like the inverse, considering Christine wasn't, she even says, it's like, oh, I didn't like her at first, but now I do, which is the inverse, because Cole was all about, yeah, Lisa, and now, like, Christine is. So they go back to her place, and lo and behold, Mary's hiding in a closet, and James is ready with the machete, and he's like, why'd you, oh, not smart coming back here, like, how are you even walking? I broke your ankle. She's like, I don't know. And then, like, it just that interesting moment of her being like, but I live here. And she goes towards him, and you start hearing flesh getting torn. I'm like, okay. Then Roy shows up, and Christine, like, changes the way she talks. And even Code's looking at her like, why'd you just change the way, like, what's up with that high and everything? And it's like, she's talking about all these movies she saw of his, and Code's like, you didn't see that one? She's like, yes, I did. I saw it by myself. I'm like, it's like, oh, and that thing you did in that movie with your hand? He's like, yeah. And then Lisa comes out covered in blood, and she's like, yeah, guys, I need your help. And just all of them standing over the body. Once again, it's the exaggeratedness of life, because this isn't the most rational world. It's meant to be like, like batshit crazy, like bonkers, like extra, like exaggerated world, because like seeing the circumstances, like, all of them are handling it. It's like, you should be freaking out. None of you are. You're just like super like, oh, self-defense. It's like, self-defense. She like chewed his head off. It's like, no, she almost decapitated him. There's a big difference between decapitating and almost. It's like she chewed into him and like very cannibalistic. And like, obviously there's the conversation and like, Roy's like, I would just up and leave you guys to deal with the whole whether to call the cops or not situation, but a producer van dropped me off, so like they know I was here, so I'm kind of screwed in that part. So all we can do is get rid of the body, because Code wants to call the police, but it's like, right, I think if we call the police getting involved, we're going to get arrested, and then we're going to have to avoid jails. I think the best solution typically is to avoid that altogether by just not getting like arrested in the first place, not even getting involved with the cops in the first place. So, and then Lisa just covered mouth full of like just mouth and dress covered in blood, and just that bloody mess, being like, yeah, almost being like, yeah, I like that idea. It's like, maybe you should have thought about that before you ripped into this dude. And there's like the whole argument back and forth between Code because he is high right now, but he's the only one being kind of rational about it. It's like, for him, it's like, nah, we can't just like throw this dude in the ditch. Like, what if I OD'd and like the drug dealers didn't know me, and so that like I didn't have my ID with me, so they just threw me in a ditch. And like Christine's trying to calm him down, but once again, she's a lot more on the Lisa bandwagon now than Code is. Even being like, this is some freaky stuff, and she's like, yeah, I get that it's some freaky stuff and this is crazy and wild, but also like he's almost like accusing her of being like, are you only going along with this because Roy's here, like because he's a movie star? And so they end up kind of breaking up, and just like, oh, like she's like, well, maybe we're not a good match or whatever. She's like, you know what, I don't even like your band. I'm like, oh, come on, that's a low blow, Christine. You don't have to insult man's band. Be like, yeah, I only liked it because we were together. Now we're not together. I don't have to pretend to like your band anymore. Which is like, oh, that's so mean. But then like Lisa did go towards the closet. I thought she was going to open it, but Mary wasn't going to be there because I figured like Mary probably slipped out when she went out to get everybody else. Maybe like she hid somewhere else in the place. I mean, literally no one else lives there, but I guess she was too scared to move. But at the same time, it's like, because they'd even pointed at, like, Code had pointed that out earlier. He saw that coyote's corpse, and it's getting more and more rotten, which I'm like, once again, metaphors upon metaphors. Is that supposed to be a metaphor for who Lisa is, like who she was before, is being eaten away slowly but surely? Like, maybe the kittens aren't a metaphor for her. Maybe they're not a metaphor for her soul, but maybe the coyote's rotting corpse is, and the kittens kind of represent the corruption that Burroughs kind of sending to devour her soul. Like, I mean, maybe that's what it is. Maybe the kittens are literal manifestations of the corruption that has devoured her soul and not her soul. I'm again just throwing it out there as a possibility, because once again, we still have no idea what they are other than like the price, but what the actual price is in that case. It is interesting considering your connection to Jaguars. I wonder, is it just because it's Lisa, it's manifesting your cats, or is it just that it's always Burroughs' thing? I mean, because the cat motif was already there, like, it's been there since the beginning. Like, the first thing we saw in the episode was a cat, and then, like, the cats were eating on the coyote's body in the first episode, so. Once again, I also interpret that as, like, maybe that's stemming from the 9 Lives thing. Once again, that depends on, like, if she ends up spewing up, like, 3 more kittens in the next 2 episodes or not. But, like, Code was just kind of like, nah, man, like, I was wondering if he was going to stay behind or not. And she's like, are you coming or not? And he was like, were you always like this? And that is a question, like, was this always a part of Lisa and it's just been buried deep down inside? And I think it's sad, too, because even once circling back to that line at the beginning of the season of, I mess everyone up. He's like, you didn't mess me up. And lo and behold, here we are a couple episodes later, and she has. And Mary comes out, and he was like, hey, you're the actress from Lucy's Eye. It's like, yeah, you know, me and Lisa, we dated for a while. He's like, yeah, we were almost in love. But then we lost touch, and then we got back in touch, and kind of look at all the craziness that's coming in his life. He had even pointed out earlier, it's like, yeah, all this terrible stuff has kind of happened, like, the moment Lisa came back into his life. But then, like, you know, you had Mary be like, oh, yeah, we were in love, too. And it's like, wait, you were? Because Burrow even knew that they were lovers and stuff like that, which I even love that line where Burrow had been like, oh, what does she, oh, she must mean something to you. She's like, she means what I let her mean. I was like, ooh, that's very effed up, because for Mary, that relationship meant a lot. Like, which interesting, because like the same thing applies with like Roy, who made a whole comment about like he's very self-destructive, but he can't be with Lisa because he can't let himself get addicted to her just because of all the craziness, for himself as well as his career. Like, it will all kind of suffer if he gets too attached. And like once again, it's not just all the terrible stuff you've done, but it's like, if despite all that, I can find myself still being addicted to you because I like you, and all the craziness is very destructive, and me being a self-destructive person, I can latch onto that easily. So maybe that just shows progress in his character, where he's just like, yo, I'm self-destructive, but I can see the key sign is like, this is not a good thing to dive too deeply into, even though you're already super on the deep end. But for him, it's like, yeah, that's why I have to cut ties with you permanently. Lisa handled it well. She was like, oh, kind of just waved him off goodbye. But I'm like, maybe he was kind of like Code and Mary, just kind of a means to an end, or maybe she legitimately kind of liked them, because I think her and Code were more serious than like her and Mary. because like Code starts laughing when he hears about like, oh, because it's like, oh, she's like, did she ever mention me? It's like, oh yeah, she talked about you a lot, and Mary's like happy about it. It's like, yeah, she just kept calling you an actress, and the moment he started laughing, and the look in Mary's eye was like, she's gonna kill Code, isn't she? And when Lisa shows up later on, Code's dead. I wasn't surprised. It's like whether it was just because he laughed at it, just because it's like, oh man, that's because he was high and everything, but also just kind of like the messed upness of it. Like, right here we are, like in love with this girl. Like you were someone important to her, but you were just a means to an end. That like you were deeply in love with her, but it was never not this. Like it wasn't reciprocated. So like I'm thinking like he probably was laughing because it's like right the same thing for me, and just. It's more so because, like, she knows, like, what Code and him had was real and what they didn't wasn't, so it was payback. So she stabbed him in the eye. Like, right, Lisa's the reason why I lost my eye and went crazy, so... once again, it's not like... no one's well-adjusted. No one's... I think that's going to be the point of, like, kind of everyone walks away from this show being terrible. But I even love Code being like, this isn't a consequence. Jules being on fire, now that's a consequence. This whole situation here is far from just a consequence. It's just straight up a dead body and stuff. But other than all of that, Jonathan did call Lou at one point during the episode, but I think that was just kind of that byproduct of like a, hey, what she had mentioned earlier about there's being some part of them still there. She does say like she needs special ingredients to keep them alive. I'm assuming is what we saw her pour into Jonathan that episode when she blended stuff up, but... special ingredients necessary to keep them from turning into like Walking Dead zombies where they literally slide apart, probably flesh and all that slide off and just break down in general. So it's probably all that is what keeps them looking more like zombies rather than, like I said, Walking Dead zombies. I did like when they were dealing with James' body and stuff like that. It's kind of like, you know, Christine asked me so many questions like, how did it feel? She's like, it's almost like opening up a present and being like quite a surprise or something like that. And it's like, okay, so any last words? And just like Lisa's like, fuck this man, and just like began like, you know, covering the body up. But she was distraught when she saw Code because he was her friend and they were great. Yeah, they worked better as great friends than like lovers and boyfriend and girlfriend. But I think it's also like, yeah, he is someone that she cared about. So I guess it's like her need for revenge. It has finally swung the other way. The pendulum has kind of swung the other way now. Because like I said, like everyone in Lou's vicinity ended up kind of getting the axe. Which I guess the Joel situation is technically he falls into like Lisa's life because he's tight with Code and Christine. But yeah, like Code was her bud, and so to know, like, seeing the eye situation and knowing exactly what knife it is, she knows it was, I think that was kind of implying, like, she knows it was Mary, or maybe it was implying, like, she was thinking it was Lou. Either way, she's gonna be out for revenge. It's interesting, because she showed up at, Boro's place the moment she was wearing the raincoat. That solidified it even more. I was like, at first I was like, is she gonna try and kill Boro? Or I was like, no, like, she was wearing the raincoat. Well, maybe for something else. I don't know. But part of me was initially thinking, like, are you at Boro's place because you're going after her because you want, like, she's a key figure in everything that Lisa's doing? Or, which my initial thought was, are you there because you want to use Boro as a means against Lisa? Is that where we're at with this? That's what I was starting to wonder. Like, are you trying to make a deal with her yourself? Whether Boro will be all about that, who knows? I guess it also depends. Like, maybe Lisa might... I mean, maybe Mary will end up being a better host. I don't know. Especially considering, like, yeah, Boro will probably like, I'm not too keen about the one eye thing. To be fair, she did fix up Lisa, but who knows if bringing the eye back will be possible. At least, like, it was healing, like, Lisa's wounds and stuff like that. So I'm not sure if it could straight up reconstitute like an eye or something like that. But a lot of interesting things. I'm really curious to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.